stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI HASAN of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on January 20th, 2022 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. First, as usual, my housekeeping stuff, which is to tell you that listen to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking anytime by simply going to my website, karmicevolution.com, and clicking on the upper right-hand portion of the banner labeled Radio Show. From there, you can scroll down the page and hear the most recent show, either live or recorded, and or search the archive listings for past shows that you might have missed or to which you'd like to listen again. Separately, you're welcome to follow me on my Facebook page, Karmic Evolution for Your Soul, where you can sign up for my Conversations About Consciousness newsletter as well. And finally, I'm offering still my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading to listeners for only $99. And this reading is for those of you who are interested in astrology and want to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart or natal horoscope. It's essentially a snapshot of the exact positions of the planets at the precise moment and location of your birth, and your horoscope reveals a great deal about you. So when it's used as a tool for soul growth, a Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading can be tremendously helpful for learning your soul's true purpose and how to move towards your highest destiny in this lifetime. It's good for recognizing patterns of behavior that likely originated early in your life or during past lives that affect your current relationships, your career choices, your finances, and or your health. But these patterns may represent old conditioning, soul conditioning that no longer serves your soul's true karmic journey, assuming you want to go forward and live your life to its highest potential now. Finally, this reading provides insights into what may have tripped you up in the past and how to entertain new perspectives and gain greater awareness through astrological insight that brings greater happiness and ultimately more satisfaction into your life. Now, all of this is easy to ascertain when you take advantage of my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $99. Simply email me at SHERI, that's SHERI, at karmicevolution.com, and we'll schedule your reading ASAP. At almost half the regular price, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. All right, so now it's on to this week's Astro News you can use. We're in the waning portion of the monthly lunar cycle now, since the January 17th Cancer full moon at the beginning of this week asked us to release our attachment to any self-sabotaging, judgmental thoughts or beliefs that stymie or block our ability to feel compassion, first for ourselves and as an extension for others. It was just before this Cancer full moon that Mercury stationed retrograde in Aquarius, thus beginning its annual retrograde cycle for 2022 by moving back from air into the earth element. And in doing so, for 3 of its current and upcoming 2022 retrograde periods, we begin to review, rethink, revise, and reorient ourselves and our beliefs away from issues focused solely on how we relate to others and more toward the earthy, physical, tangible aspects of our lives. So by December 29th of 2022, which is the end of this year, Mercury's 4th retrograde period that starts then takes place fully in earthy Capricorn, and Mercury remains in Earth signs during 3 of its retrograde cycles in 2023, and that's until it hits its 4th cycle circa December 12th of 2023, which is when it begins its retrograde cycles. It begins that retrograde cycle in Capricorn, but it segues back into Sagittarius, and its 2023 backward swim begins from the earth element back into that of fire. All right, so that's the big picture, right? However, the current focus, as Mercury begins to move back into the earth element now, tells us that our thoughts will shift towards shoring up that which constitutes our tangible resources, excuse me, and will continue doing so for all of 2022 and most of 2023. So during this period, it'll benefit us all to prioritize defining what we need to review during these periods in order to take better care of what constitutes our life's physical foundations. This includes paying attention to our physical environment, right? Our home, our jobs. I mean, whether we work from an office or at home or out in the environment, right? That's the foundation there, right? It provides money, which provides a foundation for us to be able to survive. So that obviously includes our finances. So it's time to pay attention to our finances and our body's health. So these are the Capricorn, Virgo, Taurus kinds of things, right? And I'd add, especially as related to when Mercury is going to retrograde through Taurus this year, that it's about the condition of Mother Earth, because it's Mother Earth who's the provider of most of our tangible resources, which are, food and water when we get down to the very basics of it, right? And that's because they provide sustenance, right? If we don't have food and water, we can't survive. But also, Taurus and Mother Earth are connected to providing the necessary climate in which we're able to grow and harvest the kinds of things that we need for our very survival. So I think we'll probably during that period see a lot more about climate change and the effects of climate change, which I'm not going to go into now. I just want to mention that as a tangent. Now, I discussed at length last week the deeper meaning and purpose of Mercury's retrograde cycles in general. So feel free to check that out if you haven't already, but I'm going to reiterate some of it here and remind everyone that these retrograde cycles through the earth element represent, the retrograde cycles in general, like all Mercury retrogrades, right, represent a time when the empirical, logical, ego-oriented portion of our psyches, usually referred to as the left brain, give way to the more right-brained, visual, imaginal, and intuitive energies of our psyches. So this switch in dominant emphasis from left brain to right brain is one of the reasons why we're not so empirically tied into the world. And when I say empirical, I mean factual. It's like being cognizant of where you are, Oh, I put my keys down on the desk. I need to go to the car. Let me grab the keys. Where are the keys? Oh my God, why didn't I put them on the desk? I always put them on the desk, right? This is the kind of stuff, where are my glasses? Oh, they're on your head, obviously that happens to many of us all the time. It's not just during Mercury retrograde, but what I'm saying is that's an example of not being empirically tuned in, right? So it's the reason why we forget our keys, we lose our phones, we misplace our airline tickets and stuff like that. It's also why we're subjected to communication snafus which include misunderstandings, delays, equipment or technological malfunctions, and the like. The normal mental connections become disrupted while we're busy processing what we've learned empirically, meaning from the outside world, from our teachings, our learning in school and things like that, or cause and effect, observation, correlation, and embedding this information into our soul as knowledge, right? And at the same time, we're bringing up from the depths of the psyche's soul the wisdom or knowledge that's already been embedded there, but we're bringing it back into consciousness, perhaps from previous lifetimes and learnings through different experiences that didn't happen necessarily. Well, they might have happened early in life and been buried, right? Memories are buried often, especially if they're traumatic. They come back into consciousness now. Now, that's not an easy thing for many of us who are used to operating solely on an if I can see it, only then can I believe it philosophy in general. But this knowledge transfer going on during Mercury's retrograde periods explains why we're cautioned not to make large purchases or sign important contracts. Mercury retrograde has gotten such a reputation with the general public that people start to panic. It's like, oh my God, or they get very strict about Mercury retrograde rules. But, as our right brain functions come to the forefront and our left brain ones recede for a bit, it's true that we might miss some detailed information that's contained in the fine print of our purchases or in contracts, that we have to sign for work or, other things. But, Mercury retrograde periods, for much of the same reasons, are not known as good times to launch projects or businesses, because something or another usually gets screwed up in the process. But, there are often actions we can't avoid taking during Mercury retrograde periods. And when this is true, the important thing to remember, as with all astrologically influenced movements, is it's not what happens to us during these times, but rather how we handle it. So there's not that much need to fear Mercury retrograde. Rather, it's a great time to help us plan for the future. Because if we're, we know that maybe it's not the best time to schedule a house closing or buy a new car or a computer or other technological equipment or big appliances. But we can plan for that, right? It's not the time to publish the book or announce the new business, but it's time to continue to revise the manuscript of the book and revise or tweak the plans for announcing the business. You see the difference? So, but if there's no choice, it's life, right? Life is what happens when we're busy making other plans. So if what happens isn't in alignment with the plans we're making, we gotta shift, right? So as I said, Mercury retrograde periods are good for researching the purchase you might want to make, planning the business or the book launch, looking at new houses or apartments, and gathering information that may add to what's already been accumulated. Because it's during Mercury retrograde that you may see something that doesn't jive with the info you've gotten before, or you may get a new perspective on an old idea. Especially now, since Mercury begins his backward journey through Aquarius, or he began it on January 14th, which provides us opportunities for aha moments or revelations about things we may have thought we already knew. So as Mercury, as I mentioned, stationed on January 14th, it came close to an exact square. And I'm going to look back a little bit before I go forward, which is something I often do. But Mercury coming close to an exact square to Uranus and Taurus as the planet stationed might have left some of us feeling highly nervous, anxious, or just generally jumpy between then and leading up to and through the Cancer full moon on January 17th. And if that was the case, rest assured you weren't alone. Further, at the Cancer full moon, the newly stationed retrograde Mercury formed a T-square. It squared not only Uranus, but it squared also Hygeia, which is the female goddess asteroid of health in Scorpio. So Mercury formed a square to Uranus, and Uranus was opposed to Hygeia, meaning there's a square between Mercury and Hygeia as well. So we saw a lot of surprising announcements at that time. Mercury square Uranus, especially, some of it related to health issues, right? Is the pandemic spreading? Is the pandemic decreasing in my area? I live in the New Jersey, New York area. We're starting to see a decrease. I track the virus statistics every day, and they've been coming down for probably about the past week now at a rate of 4 to 10% per day, pretty consistently, where it's 4% and 6% and 8% and now 10%. So as we know that that's waning here, we also know that it's continuing to accelerate throughout some of the rest of the country, and that is particularly overtaxing our medical response teams. Right? So I would liken this T-square of Mercury to Uranus opposite Hygeia at the full moon to a lot of what we've been communicating about since then, right? Now, we also had the sun's meet up with Pluto in Capricorn, which perfected on January 16th. And, there were some surprises, again, related to Mercury square Uranus, that, if I want to extrapolate it out as in terms of health, I would say, what I'm going to talk about is the health of the United States, which is, my country anyway. I know I may have listeners from different areas of the world, and I hope I do, so not to be too myopic about it, but, we are having a huge amount of turmoil here. So when the sun met up with Pluto in Capricorn on the 16th, it was just before the full moon after Mercury stationed retrograde, and the day before, or 2 days before, Uranus stationed direct, which I'm going to discuss in a few. So I had mentioned last week that there might be some political surprises, which, I talked about Arizona Senator Kristen Sinema's speech on the Senate floor in opposition to changing the Senate filibuster rules. Now remember, the Sun conjunct Pluto is a power struggle, right? Two very strong forces meeting each other, or one person saying, I'm going to do this, and the other person saying, no, you're not. All right? So, Kristen Sinema, Pluto is also, or can be, a manipulative energy. And I often talk about manipulation by saying that, the full definition of manipulation is not necessarily always pejorative. If you manipulate the baby to take his medicine by, jumping up and down or playing peekaboo or whatever to get him or her to open her mouth and take the medicine because they've got 104 fever, and if they don't bring it down, they're going to die. Right? That kind of manipulation is a positive use of Pluto energy, right? You have the power to save somebody and rejuvenate them or regenerate them, which is part of the definition of Pluto as well, or Pluto Scorpio. If you're going to manipulate the little old lady out of her millions of dollars, by selling her something that's not real, then clearly that's the low-end manifestation of the concept of manipulation, right? So, going back to the Sun-Pluto meetup in Capricorn, just as President Biden was giving a speech about voting rights the day before, and the next day he's on his way to speak with the Democratic senators to make his case for the Voting Rights Act and to ask them not to stand in the way of changing the filibuster rules just for this one bill, the Voting Rights Act bill. Kristen Sinema manipulatively preempts him by giving a speech on the Senate floor touting her opposition to changing the Senate filibuster rules, right? So, Sun Pluto's about empowerment. Like I said, it's who's got the power, you or me? And this kind of oppositional standoff was pretty easy to see and to correlate to this astrological energy at that time. Now, we also saw, again, related to health, a flurry of health and pandemic-related communication being criticized during these last few days, where there seemed to be a lot of confusion about directives on masks and what kind of masks to use, and advice coming out of the Centers for Disease Control about, again, mask wearing and what kinds of masks, how much, immunity we've got if we had the Delta variant, but now are we still going to get the Omicron variant? And, is there going to be another variant coming along? What's most important, though, as we progress through Mercury retrograde now, is that while things might seem more confusing over the short time, again, I reiterate, this is a period of review. And, there's also current confusion swirling around whether or not Vladimir Putin of Russia, who's reportedly amassed 100,000 Russian soldiers along the Ukrainian border, will actually invade that nation. So, again, the Sun-Pluto conjunction, as it was waxing, brought us the results of the recent conversation between Putin and President Biden, and seems now to have set off or triggered a battle that's resulted in a standoff of the calm before the storm kind. In other words, this energy was triggered by January 16th and leading up to it, and it now remains to be seen what is the result of that trigger. So several knowledgeable political pundits have said that they believe there's a 50-50 chance that Russia will, in fact, invade Ukraine. And whatever happens now during Mercury's retrograde period, which doesn't end until February 3rd, whether this happens or not by then, this period is likely to be filled with a lot of confusing rhetoric on both sides. And again, I'm going to quote from the yesterday's New York Times, and an article and that said this, and here I quote, President Biden said on Wednesday, this was at his 2-hour press conference, that he now expected President Vladimir Putin of Russia would order an invasion of Ukraine, delivering a grim assessment that the diplomacy and threat of sanctions issued by the United States and its European allies were unlikely to stop the Russian leader from sending troops across the border. Sun-Pluto conjunction. And the article continues. Do I think he'll test the West, test the United States and NATO as significantly as he can? Yes, I think he will, Mr. Biden told reporters. And the piece also adds, and I quote here, Mr. Biden's comment went well beyond the current intelligence assessments described by White House officials, which conclude that Mr. Putin has not made a decision about whether to invade. Now, others, that's the end of that quote from that article, others have noted that no one is really clear about Putin's aim in trying to incite a reaction from the U.S. and its NATO allies that might, in fact, spark a bigger conflagration that might prevent what appears to be Putin's primary goal, which is to infiltrate the Ukraine back into the old Soviet order or the old Soviet power structure. So, again, we can see how during this Mercury retrograde period, which starts out in Aquarius before it moves back into Capricorn on January 25th, both sides are reviewing their options before taking action or needing to react. This is like that moment, like I said, the calm before the storm, right? Both parties are poised for action, but nobody's taken any action yet that warrants a reaction from the other side. So meanwhile, we might note that Uranus is stationed direct in Taurus, which occurred on January 18th, serves as a reminder that this energy represents the act of individuation. And here I'm going to talk a little bit more about its effects for us on a personal level. Individuation, a term coined by Carl Jung, means the process of becoming who we came into this lifetime, this incarnation, this physical body to be, along with the concept that we all have the freedom to choose in our lives, being our uniquely creative solar self without fear, shame, or blame helps move us toward our true purpose in this lifetime. Liz Green writes a lot about this. She has an entire book about it, but she talks about the fact that, Uranian Aquarian energy is really about being part of a group, and that Jung's definition of individuation is actually about breaking away from the group and either finding other more like-minded groups, our tribe, the people who are more simpatico with us, who understand us, who get us, when in fact our groups of origin, our family, our religious community, our social community, our schools, they may never have gotten us, right? So the process of individuation, as discussed by Carl Jung, is saying, if you need to throw off the shackles of past conditioning that convinced you that you have to stay allied with your family or with your community or whatever, the tribe into which you were socially, economically, geographically, religiously, morally born, that you now, one of your life's missions, in fact, right? We're given the opportunities all the time, but I say now, but with Uranus stationing direct, which I'll explain in a minute, we're being given the opportunity to say, wait a minute, why do I have to continue to conform to this group's beliefs or ideas about me? Why can't I be free to think differently, to do differently, to act differently, to work differently, to love differently, etc., etc.? Okay? So with the energy of Uranus, when we refuse this call to individuate, often we get slammed by sudden unexpected events that force us to change. So whether we deem these events to be pleasant or painful is always up to us, but it pays to bear in mind how many times we've looked back in life and discovered the silver lining in what seemed so earth-shatteringly shocking at the time. Leaving a group may bring on grief or remorse, but finding the new group brings on joy and happiness, right? Because we can really be authentic in those newer groups. So these are the times through which we discover who we really are. And, the Cancer full moon earlier this week asked us, as I noted last week when I quoted the trauma and addiction expert, Dr. Gabor Mate, it asked us whether we're in the driver's seat of our lives or whether we're living based on a pre-programmed set of past rules and regulations that we had no choice about and no hand in creating. So now that Uranus is direct, since its station retrograde on August 18th of 2021, we might take notice of Jungian astrologer Aaron Sullivan's take on this planet's purpose during its retrograde periods and when it's aspecting a particular planet or sensitive point in our own charts. And here I quote, Uranus makes us aware of imperfection, Sullivan writes in her book Retrograde Planet. She continues, Uranus awakens our dissatisfaction with that which is superficial, rote, habitual, or based on sheer animal survival instinct. The elitism of Uranus has the power suddenly to reveal a relationship or lifestyle as being false, pretentious, or sordid, whereas before it had been perfectly suitable. Uranus, which is the sky god from Greek mythology, his disgust at his own offspring, the monsters that he suppressed in Gaia's womb because of their undignified and ugly appearance, lies at the foundation of the sudden rejection of the past. The past becomes sordid, ugly, undeveloped, and stupid. We wonder how we could have been such fools not to have seen the base, unevolved aspects of our own and others' natures. End quote. In other words, when there's a Uranus transit during the retrograde period as Uranus stations direct, it's difficult to have seen the light and then ignore that light once Uranus has revealed it to us, even though that might have come in a more sudden or shocking way. Another way to put it is, that old cliche, how do you keep them down on the farm now that they've seen Paris? You can't unlearn something you just learned. So revelations and realizations made during the recent Uranus retrograde period, and again, bear in mind this planet retrogrades once every year for approximately 5 months, they can't go back into hiding when Uranus stations direct again. So it's easy to see, especially since Saturn entered Uranus-ruled Aquarius. Now, yes, that's the modern ruler, and traditionally Saturn ruled Aquarius before the planet Uranus was discovered in the late 1700s. But I prefer to use the modern ruler. But, we can see the resonance because Saturn, as the ruler of Aquarius, really brings foundational stability to the group. The group has to have some kind of structure, otherwise it's just chaotic and, it's not going to accomplish any of its stated purpose, But Uranus, as representative of Aquarius, which is a fixed sign, is an air sign, and that's about our thoughts and our beliefs. So we can see that Aquarius can often get caught up in ideology, which is to say that it's more concerned about the idea of something being perfect, which is the analogy that Aaron Sullivan just made to the sky god Uranus, which is from which we get the name Uranus for the planet, because he thought that the offspring from his mating with Gaia were too ugly and disgusting and crude to be given the advantage of seeing the light of day, so he stuffed them back in her womb. Right? So, she's taken that mythology and she's given context to it. But it became a more prominent archetype when Saturn and Jupiter, they had a conjunction in Aquarius at the end of 2020. And so since then, the recognition of the extreme polarized animosity between groups of people, whether it's over politics, the pandemic and the vaccines, schools, work, you name it, right? Transportation, we could go on and on. There's a million different aspects of life that have been affected, particularly since the Aquarian archetype has become more prevalent in the sky. So meanwhile, combined with January 18th ingress, the same day that Uranus stationed retrograde, of the transiting karmic nodes back into a Scorpio south node and Taurus north node, which will last for the next 18 and a half months, we'll be seeing a lot of what's previously been hidden in society begin to boil over onto the surface, right? So in other words, Uranus stations direct. We already see that Mercury's retrograde almost in square to Uranus brought some surprises of the kind that are related, at least for the short term, to power struggles, while the Sun conjoined Pluto in Capricorn, right? And that this has all pretty much happened at the same time as the nodes shifting back. The nodes spend 90% of their time or more regressing, the true nodes, and about 10% of their time direct. So again, without going down that rabbit hole, the bigger picture meaning is that these transiting nodes I view as karmic because they're reflective of the energy within the collective, at least for that 18 to 19 months that they are in effect in the sky. So we're moving away from Sagittarius south node, and when we look at a south node, we look at the lower end manifestation of that archetypal energy. Sagittarius, the planet of higher consciousness, or ruled by Jupiter, the planet of higher consciousness, shows a lower level of consciousness when we're looking at it negatively, which is that we have developed a belief system which leads us to think we're always right, or that we have the truth with a capital T, right? And Gemini in the North Node said the energy you're to move toward is to opening up your mind to new information, because the purpose of doing so brings you up to date so that you're not stuck in the past thinking you believe the same things you did when you were 19 or 25 or, 36 or, 50, whatever, the first half of life, let's say, right? So as these nodes shift, the South Node goes back into Scorpio, which is Pluto ruled. And that tells us that the collective is now, and I talked about this a little bit last week when I quoted from Celeste Teal's book, The Lunar Nodes. Scorpio and Pluto, there's an 8th house resonance here, right? Scorpio and Pluto have to do with wealth, particularly hidden wealth. They have to do with deep bonded trust and loyalty. And the reason that this archetype is related to sex or sexuality is because one theoretically, I'm not going to use judgmental language. I was going to say should be, but, the optimal, depending on one's opinion, right, is that you don't engage in sexual relations or marriage or whatever until you have a deep bonded sense of trust in the other person. So those are neither negative or positive, but the low side energy of Scorpio is that it harbors our shadow, right? It harbors the energy that's been hidden deep in the recesses of our subconscious. And when we're talking about the transiting nodes and the collective energy, we're looking at the shadow side of things like mob rule or, fascism, right? Because Scorpio, again, ruled by Pluto, is about power. So if we look at it for ourselves personally, it asks us, where have we felt disempowered in our lives, and how can we move towards a feeling of true internal empowerment, self-empowerment? But when we're talking about the collective, we're saying, oh, wow, all this shadow, stuff is coming up into the surface for us to see. So all of the prejudice, all of the greed, all of the jealousy, all of the negative manipulations. And I think it's very interesting that over the last year or two, particularly, or actually really over the whole period of the Trump administration, where people have, it's as if they've discovered that they've been lied to, but instead of dealing directly with the source of the lies and, working to undo that or rectify that, they just decide that everybody's lying to them. So the government lies to us, the medical industry lies to us, the health industry lies to us, and the political industry lies to us, and the corporate industries lie to us. And it's true that they all have, in various different ways, lied to us as members of the collective over the years, right? And it's almost like this is coming home to roost. But what we're asked to do is to let go of these suspicions and, fear of being overpowered by these entities that we feel lie to us, particularly if we are not, mentally clear and we are conspiracy theorists, and move towards the simplicity of the Taurus North Node. And the simplicity of the Taurus North Node, because it's an earth sign and represents the physical world and the body, as I said before when I was talking about Mercury retrograde through Taurus, it gives us the movement from the South Node in Scorpio asks us to move from being suspicious and self-protective because we are afraid of being overpowered by another or others, to the calm, serene knowing that as long as we have faith in ourselves, our bodies, in the natural world, that we will always survive. Right? So over the next 18 and a half months or so, we're going to be seeing a lot of what's previously been hidden in society begin to boil over into the surface. And again, Scorpio's ruler Pluto, hides in the underworld, our garbage, the stuff we don't want to look at, or allow anyone else to see. And dispersed among this rotten, smelly, decaying stuff lies our buried treasure, often in the form of what the earth produces naturally underneath its surface. So literally gold and other precious metals, diamonds, gems, etc., oil, right? We can't have failed to notice how much anger there is right now, or for the last couple of months over oil prices and inflation. Pluto is the natural ruler of the 8th house, and the 8th house is shared resources. So the kinds of things that we find under the surface of the earth are there for all of us, right? So, but manipulation over that, manipulation over who earns the most wealth from the things that are buried under the earth, or from the things that money will buy, like, we are all very aware of the amount of money that's under the control of like 6 or 7 multi-billionaires right now, right? So as Mitchell Lewis has said on my show before, Pluto's like a boil that brings to the surface the disease that's been brewing underneath, or the bacteria, right? Which would be more analogous with the metaphor of a boil. So once that boil is lanced, that's when the healing can begin. But how long both will take, the lancing and the healing, remains to be seen. But the one thing we can say with certainty is that what's been buried in the collective unconscious, and again, greed, jealousy, prejudice, the desire for power at all costs, the lack of morals, scruples, or a sense of justice or injustice, and much more, is now going to become even more visible for all with eyes to see. Now, I'd like to go back to something, too, which is that, transiting Jupiter began to make a square to the transiting karmic nodes at the time of the Sun-Mercury conjunction in Sagittarius back on November 28th. Because what I wanted to talk about is the fact that we're going to have on January 23rd a conjunction of Mercury and the Sun in Sagittarius. But also to point out that this is the second of 3 conjunctions that are happening between November 28th of 2021 and, hang on a second, I have to find the last one because I wrote here. Oh, and March 2nd, right? So the first one happened November 28th in Sagittarius. The one coming up in a few days happens January 23rd in Aquarius. And the one in March happens March 2nd in Aries. So, hang on, let me find my gather my thoughts and find my place again. So, what I'm trying to point out is the conjunction that'll happen on the 23rd is part of a series. And that when Jupiter began to make its square towards the transiting karmic nodes, which were in Sagittarius South Node and Gemini North Node at the time, and the Sun-Mercury conjunction in Sagittarius happened on November 28th, that the Jupiter square didn't really begin to perfect until the end of December of 2021 and into early January 2022. So as the Sun met Mercury in Sagittarius on November 28th of last year, a quick check back of the news at that time shows that we were beginning to find out about the Omicron variant and its origins in South Africa. Remember, Sagittarius is foreign people, foreign cultures, foreign places. And many in the mainstream media were beginning to express their frustration, which really was their lack of belief or their doubt and their lack of hope because of the slow pace of the Biden administration's Voting Rights Act legislation due to the Democrat senators' holdout. If you remember, there was a lot of talk at that time. Christmas Cinema says this. What is Joe Manchin going to do? Joe Manchin is not doing that. He's still pretending that he's going to go forward with a compromise, and then all of a sudden, boom, he says he's not, and all that occurred between then and obviously now. So we also saw a great deal of frustration expressed in the news between then and now, or really between then and probably right after, about mid-January, just about a week or 10 days ago, with the Department of Justice in the U.S., because people were complaining that it wasn't moving fast enough on these cases dealing with the January 6th Capitol riot. Why wasn't anyone in the top echelons of government getting subpoenaed? Why weren't they getting questioned? Why aren't we forcing them to? When are they gonna blah, 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 right? So, and at the same time, the media did start reporting also about the buildup of Russian troops on the Ukrainian border and questioning whether Putin was gearing up for actual war there. So again, most of these issues are still in flux, and that's in part because, you know, the energy of the January 16th Sun-Pluto conjunction in Cap which seems to have culminated yesterday. And again, I'm going to read from the Times. Senate Democrats made an impassioned case on Wednesday, this was yesterday, January 19th, for legislation to counter an onslaught of new voting restrictions around the country, but they failed to overcome a Republican blockade or unite their own members behind a change in filibuster rules to pass it. And it continues, though the twin defeats were never in doubt, Democrats pushed forward in an effort to highlight what they called a crisis in voting rights and to underscore the refusal of Republicans to confront it. They did succeed in forcing the Senate for the first time to debate the bill, leading to hours of raw and emotional arguments on the floor over civil rights, racism, and how elections are conducted, end quote. Now, again, this occurred in the wake of the Uranus station direct in Taurus, January 18th, and yesterday's entrance of the Sun into Aquarius on January 19th. And as we approach this second conjunction of the Sun and Mercury, but this time in Uranus-ruled Aquarius. So what does that portend? On the national political level, it would seem we can equate the stymied efforts of Democrats to move forward successfully with bringing the Voting Rights Act bill to a vote, and the fact that they're now, Mercury retrograde, reviewing their next steps forward. One of the other things I pointed out in the past, but didn't during this particular show, is that Uranus is the natural ruler of the chart's 11th house, and Aquarius, as the sign it rules, has a connotation with the legislative body, meaning those who are the lawmakers who pass the laws. So again, that fits the symbology of what's going on right now with Mercury retrograde in Aquarius. So in terms of the pandemic, the CDC and others are still reviewing whether or not vaccines will be safe for those under the age of 5, how to handle the situation at our nation's schools, many of which are facing teacher shortages, and whether to begin treating this pandemic as the new normal, which reduces some of its previous urgency. You know, in other words, they're starting to talk about herd immunity as a more factual possibility right now. And the fact that the weakening of the pandemic's virus variant from Delta to Omicron, which doesn't affect or doesn't seem to affect the lungs as seriously, negating a need for being put on respiratory inhalation machines or respirators, right? Is now waning. And on an international level, all concerned parties are reviewing whether or not, as I said, Russia will decide to invade Ukraine. So who wins that tug of war still remains to be seen. There's likely to be some kind of important communication, though, between now and January 23rd, when the Sun makes its second conjunction to Mercury, and again, this time in Aquarius. So I would assume the Sun, again, in mundane astrology, is the ruler, the president, the dictator, the leader. You can put a positive or a negative spin on it. It doesn't matter. It's an important personage, as my junior year high school advanced placement English teacher, Miss Fava, used to say. Important personage. So what's interesting to note, again, is that, and I'll go into this in the future, but, when Mercury goes on to conjoin, or the Sun conjoins Mercury again in March, there'll be a lot of other things happening between now and then, but it'll be in Aries, which is what leaves us much more prone to fiery rhetoric. So what the situation will be, February to March, right, is going to be about 6 weeks from now. So what that entails remains to be seen, but we may hear more explosive or angry rhetoric then, or, that might lead to actions taken. So we'll see. But on the 24th of January, we also have the fact that Mars will move into Capricorn, and that on the 25th, Mercury retrogrades back into Capricorn. Now, Mars in Capricorn is known in some astrological circles as the general. And that's because Mars, of course, wants to lead Mars wants to have the war, right? He's the god of war. But in Capricorn, he doesn't engage in warlike behavior randomly. He thinks it through. Capricorn's an earth sign. It's slow, it's cautious, it's deliberate. When you have a war, it's your generals or others in the higher ranks who say, okay, so what are the logistics? What's the overall strategy? How are we going to approach the enemy? Okay, how many soldiers are we going to place here, there, or the other? Are they coming by water? Are they coming by air? Are they coming over land? What is the condition of the terrain? Who's going to be able to get out in front of the troops so that they have food and they have medical aid, if and when the battle actually engages? So Mars is far more strategic in Capricorn than he is in Sagittarius, where he's a little bit more free-flowing and attached to a potential belief or system of ideas or concepts, which may or may not be grounded realistically. So in Capricorn, it's more like, okay, now we're getting down to business. I do think that we're going to see during the period of Mars in Capricorn more movement out of the January 6th committee, more movement potentially from the legal justice system, the Department of Justice. Just now, before airtime, a story surfaced, a news piece that the January 6th committee has now subpoenaed Ivanka Trump. And that's because they want to get the information. They're reviewing Mercury retrograde, still reviewing. They've collected all this data, all these interviews, all this paperwork, all these documents. They're reviewing them. And that's leading them to their next steps. Likewise, in the civil suit by the New York Attorney General Letitia James concerning tax fraud on the part of the Trump organization, and the potential criminal case that the Southern District of New York DA is investigating, some of it concerning also finances. But I think we will hear, when Mercury goes back into Capricorn for the short term, more serious subpoenas, or the powers that be may get more serious about what will happen as a result of the subpoenas that have already been issued for people like Steve Bannon and Mark Meadows, who were the first two, who have refused to cooperate. Again, Mercury in Capricorn, too, is a little bit more of a just the facts ma'am. He doesn't want to hear, Gemini or Virgo go on and on and on and on about all the details. And then he said this, and then I said that, and then she went there, and then he did this, and that's why I couldn't do that. Well, yeah, but you couldn't do it, so the fact remains that you didn't do it, and you were supposed to do it. So Mercury in Capricorn wants to cut through the BS, right? And Mars in Capricorn, too. It has a goal. If we're going to fight a war, our goal is to win. So we may also see some movement there following Mars movement into Capricorn on this issue of the Russian potential invasion of the Ukraine. I don't know. I can't say. But I think our stance will get tougher. It already has, because President Biden did walk back some of the remarks he made at his press conference yesterday when he got criticized as being too soft. And that's part of some of the articles that I just read excerpts from. but, and whether or not Mars in Capricorn will ally NATO, right? Because not all the NATO nations are necessarily in agreement with what kinds of actions they should take, either in conjunction with the U.S. or separately if Russia does make a move to invade the Ukraine. So it's also worth mentioning before I go that Venus is still retrograde in Capricorn. So we can see there's going to be a lot of Capricorn, at least for the short term, and she stations direct next week on the 29th of January. So she's still reviewing too. We're all reviewing our relationships, reviewing what has the most value to us. We're going to begin entering this period where we need to establish the importance of our own physical body, our health, our diet, our exercise. That's Mercury going back through the earth signs. Because if we're going to stick around for a while, we have to have to be healthy, right? And that may also include, the new normal stuff that concerns the pandemic. But meanwhile, there's a lot inherent in all this political stuff about the fact that, and I didn't really say this that clearly, but I will be talking about it again in the future, that Uranus now direct, because we've had we see things now from a new perspective, we understand better where we stand, right, on issues like racism and the voting rights bill and the constrictions of the vote suppression throughout all the different states in this country. All right, so as we move forward, we're all going to probably take a bit more of a stand than we have before and ally ourselves more with the groups that represent more strongly our new beliefs or new perspectives than perhaps our old ones. All right, so that's it for this week. Thanks to everyone for joining me today. I hope you've all found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week, January 27th, for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to go